You're listening to Southern Fried Sports with Travis Reier on Tide 100.9 in Tuscaloosa. Station WTUG HD2 Northport and W265CG Tuscaloosa. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app. This is Southern Fried Sports with Bama Online senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports. Tide 100.9 and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
Make it through this year, I think I'm gonna put this bottle down. I guess as time goes on, I'll grow to miss it less than I will now. And I think I'm gonna tell her that I'm gonna go away for a while, till I can get this demon out.
It is 11 a.m. on a sunny and beautiful Hump Day Wednesday here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for another edition of Southern Fried Sports here on Tide 100.9, your home for Alabama Crimson Tide Sports. I am Jacob Harrison, filling in for the one and only Travis Reier, and just as I am filling in for Travis, I also have Mason Woods in the house filling in for me, producing the show. And together today, we will form the 60-Minute Men. Woo! And we'll get Mason included here in just a minute. We've also got intern Bobby hanging out with us, learning the ropes as well. But as always, do remind you that the show is brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard. Try them out today. Go give them a check-in and go find something sweet. Today they've got some hand-dipped graham crackers, caramel apples, elephant tusk, and all that sounds incredible. Man, listen, when I fill in for Travis, one of the hardest things to do is to compose myself when I have to read the Peterbrook ads, because I'm a chocolate fiend. If I have a dessert, I want it to have chocolate in it, unless it's like peach cobbler. Like, that's the only other thing that exists. That's not chocolate. That doesn't just... Whoo! I love desserts and I love chocolate. So give Peterbrook a look here today for me. Do it for me, because I can't go there. I'll spend way too much money. My wife will get mad at me. Go check them out. They're open Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you need to call ahead, 205-752-0211 is the number to call. 1530 McFarland Boulevard North. You can always call the show, 205-342-9904 on the Peterbrook Chocolatier hotline. Today at 11:15, we will have AJ Spur of Roll Tide Wire join the show. We'll get his thoughts on many of the changes that are taking place in college football this year, some pro Bama players as well. AJ keeps a close look at the Bama prospects, or the Bama alumni that are in the NFL, much like I do. He does it for Roll Tide Wire, much like I do it for Tide109.com. So we'll get his thoughts on that. Tua as well, obviously. He keeps an even closer eye on his Dolphins. We'll get his thoughts and opinions here in just a little bit. But as I said, Mason Woods filling in for me. Mason, what's going on, man? You having a good day so far?
Yeah, it's a pretty good day. I mean, it's better than Monday. Monday, that weather was really awful. So
yeah.
So far so good. I'm a little tired this morning. You know, had a late night. You know, putting in the hours at Domino's. The pizza grind doesn't stop. So
the pizza grind does not stop. If Mason's not here at 9:00, then I know he did not go to sleep until this morning. So, and that was the case today. As for me, you know, yesterday I went and got a tattoo. I got a cover up of a old tribal, cheap, poorly done tattoo that I got right, you know, about the time I was 18, 19 years old, and went out to Cynical up in Northport, and man, David did an incredible job. So props to him. We're not done yet. I got to go back in late August to finish this thing out. But man, I'm super happy about it. So I had to give the quick shout out to Cynical Tattoos up in Northport. So today, most of what I want to dive into still revolves around what we're dealing with the evolution of college sports. So I do want to get some folks involved on the show, 205-342-9904, around our conversation with AJ Spur so that we can kind of start to continue to hear some thoughts and opinions on the way that college football is evolving. Because while it's scary, and it's understandably scary, this is a very important week in college football history. We've already kind of went through the transfer portal phase where we're starting to understand what that is. It's one of those things where it's not going to hurt more teams than it helps, and it's not going to help more teams than it hurts. I feel like it's going to be fairly balanced. If Alabama's going to bring in 2 marquee transfers a year and lose 7 players who weren't going to play for them for the next 2 years anyway, then that kind of balances itself out, right? And those 7 players go in a myriad of different directions and help out those schools the way that they can. So, and one of those was a graduate transfer anyway, so he was going to be gone regardless. But then when you come back and you look now with the College Football Playoff Committee coming together yesterday alongside the NCAA and kind of pushing forward what we need to have pushed forward in the ways of advancing this expansion. And we talked about it on Gary's show as well. Billy Napier, a coach that gets a $2 million, a raise up to $2 million a year. It's kind of opening up the group of 5 to be more entertaining. And, while we're discussing, the entertainment side of the NBA, it works. It works to have non-traditional programs in those spots because you see something new. Now, we as Alabama fans and me as somebody who covers Alabama for a living, I want Alabama to always be good because that means more paychecks and that means better paychecks and that means more interesting trips to wherever down the road, right? Selfishly, from a myriad of positions, that's where I stand. But when you look at what's happening in the NBA and you look at what happens every year in the college basketball tournament, even look at last year in the NFL. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been awful for 20 years. They get Tom Brady. I know it's Tom Brady, and that kind of takes away from it for a little bit. But, that happens. Or we got the Kansas City Chiefs coming up now. New things happening is good. Having greatness isn't a bad thing. So it's not a bad thing that Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State run the world in college football. But it's a good thing to have other squads to come in and compete with them and see if they can knock off, the kings of the mountain. And I think that as we continue to get closer and closer to that, we should kind of, if we're sports fans who soak in everything, and I'm learning how to do that, and we soak in what's happening in these NBA playoffs, it kind of reflects positively on what's going to happen in college football, don't you think, Mason?
Yeah, I think I saw something on Twitter. I believe it said that viewership is up from last year for the NBA playoffs 30-something%.
I mean, and that's the big thing that the NCAA is missing out on. Honestly,
the argument that people aren't going to watch these games if it's not the best, if it's not your Alabama's and Clemson, that's ridiculous. People are going to watch whatever football the NCAA gives us.
Well, there's some of us who are football fans first. That's me. I watch football. If Alabama's not on, then I'm going to watch another game. Saturdays and Sundays in the fall and in the winter, I am watching football. Nothing else. Thursday nights, Monday nights, probably watching football. And I understand that there are many fans who only watch their teams. But consider the number of fans whose teams are done. Whose teams are done after Thanksgiving. And now they kind of have an opportunity to play for something. And that's where the center of the argument comes from. Oh, well, it's all about money. Of course it's about money. You think the NCAA is going to do something and not be about money? Look at what they're in court for. or what they have been in court for, and what Brett Kavanaugh eviscerated them over. It was because of the way that they handle money. But at the end of the day, what they're not going to do is anything that will damage the sport that they rely on so heavily for money. Therefore, the expansion will only be good for them financially. And in the long run, good for the sport too. You can't benefit the NCAA financially and hurt the on-field product. I don't think you can. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's naive to a degree. But like even with the NFL changing its rules a little bit to garner more viewership, they have skewed the rules in favor of the offense so there's more scoring. And has it taken away from what the sport used to be many, many years ago? Yeah, sure, to a degree. But it's also an exciting brand of football that's safer for its players, so players can play for a longer time and have a better lifestyle of health after they retire. How is any of that a bad thing? So it's the same thing in college football where the financial side is the end goal for the suits that make these decisions, but on the other side, it's a quality positive for the fans who basically give the money to those suits to indulge in the sport and to enjoy the sport. And there's something that Denon said yesterday in his phone call, and we weren't able to get into it a little, as much as I would like to because we were running out of time. But I don't understand the argument of college football is just turning into the NFL outside of the slight free agency factor that plays in with the transfer portal. Man, people are going to watch college football regardless of if these players are getting a paycheck from third parties or from schools. Preferably third parties. Let me stress that very much, is that most people that are in favor of name, image, and likeness compensation want it to come from third parties and want it to be under the umbrella of or this is me speaking from my opinion now, want it to be under the umbrella of the NCAA for them to formulate a plan to police it and make it work correctly, not just kick the can out to Congress or to states who can't formulate plans because they don't have anything to do with athletics. That's a broken idea. But when it comes down to it, like, folks are still going to watch football. And while consider the premise of the fact that there are many people who were very upset, and it's their right to be upset about it, about the protests in the NFL that have happened at the beginning of most years, over the past 4 or 5. But a lot of those people still go back and watch football. A lot of those people still go back and watch the NFL. They may not say it in public, but the ratings do not lie. The NFL dominates every time slot during the fall and winter. They cannot be stopped. And it's the same for college football, except for it plays on such a much smaller scale because 3/4 of the country feels like they are not involved in the national scene. And while I have always agreed that college football is rooted in its regional place, where it's always mattered on a regional scale much more than it has on a national scale, the way that the world is structured now with social media and everything that plays its part, you gotta make a mark nationally to be able to recruit at the highest level. That's why Alabama recruits so well. That's why Clemson recruits so well. That's why Ohio State recruits so well. That's why 3 starting quarterbacks for those 3 schools come from within 30 miles of each other in Southern California. Instead of one of them playing for USC, they all play on the opposite side of the country for the 3 best programs in college football, who are perennially featured in the national scene. So we can talk about how it ruins the sport. No, it changes the sport. Change does not automatically mean improvement, no more than it automatically means deterioration. On the grander scheme of things, it will spread things out. It will balance the playing field slightly over a long period of time, not right out of the gate. 2023, I guarantee you, is probably still going to go to Clemson, Ohio State, or Alabama. If not, it'll be a surprising team, much like LSU did a couple of years ago. But there's no reason to believe that it's going to flip the entire structure on its head and then cave in. It won't. This is building more support under a structure that's lucky that it stands at all. We'll take a break. We'll come back. AJ Spur of USA Today's Roll Tide Wire will join us on the other side. For Southern Fried Sports, I'm Jacob Harrison. We'll be right back on your home for Alabama sports, Tide 100.9.
The Alabama football countdown clock is driven by Crawford Insurance, Tuscaloosa's low-cost auto insurer. Call 752-6489 for a free quote today.
Roll Tide! Roll Tide!
There are 73 days until Alabama football. Tide 100.9 Tuscaloosa weather.
A nice early summer day is in progress across the area. Lots of sunshine, just some fair weather cumulus clouds. It'll be that way again tomorrow. 85 the daytime high today. Will drop to around 66 overnight tonight and back up to 86 degrees tomorrow. I'm meteorologist Bill Murray on Tide 100.9.
It's 82 degrees in Tuscaloosa.
Tide 100.9. For more coverage of Alabama football, visit us at Tide100.9.com or download the free Tide 100.9 app.
The Crimson Tide will not be denied.
Just a heads up, we keep a close eye on our cousins out in Birmingham. The UAB Blazers baseball program has hired former Samford baseball coach Casey Dunn as its next head coach. 17 seasons with the Bulldogs out in Samford and 3 NCAA tournament appearances. It's like good baseball is coming to UAB next season. Right now, we'll head out to the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio hotline and welcome in AJ Spur of Roll Tide Wire. Let me, real quick, I forgot you sent me this, AJ, so I didn't do my job correctly here. But, yeah, AJ Spur, writer for USA Today Sports, Roll Tide Wire, covering Alabama football and director of football operations for Tribe Sports Agency. AJ, what's going on, man? You doing all right?
How's it going? No complaints on my end. What are things looking like over there in Tuscaloosa?
It's hot. It's hot.
We got that in common at least.
Yeah, I know the sun's always kind down in Miami too, but nonetheless, it is hot. But what's exciting around here is, despite it being mid-June, the evolution of college football has kind of given us a lot to discuss moving forward. And even though a lot of these changes won't take place for a long time or are completely up in the air as to when they will change, we did get some information as far as the college football playoff expansion. Of course, as it's been reported all this time, like this is going to happen, but it does have to go through certain steps and requirements. And yesterday it passed one of those requirements, and now they'll move into the summer review phase and start to iron out some of these details. But where I want to kind of go with this is, of course, since we know that this is something that is basically going to happen, over the past 8 years, it feels like the college football playoff has done a good job, even with just 4 teams. But it has kind of narrowed things down into those 3 teams. Do you think, AJ, over time, that this will help balance things out? Like, certainly those first few years, it's probably going to stay Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. But maybe over time this will help balance the parity scale in college football?
I do, and I think, you hit the nail right on the head there. It's going to take some time. I think it's going to do so with recruiting. I mean, you look at these schools like Coastal Carolina, even SMU now is on the rise. These smaller schools and even Power 5 schools that may be, middle of the pack as far as top 25 goes, but with this, added 8 teams on top of the college football playoff now, they could have a shot at either making it or getting very, very close. They can use that to recruit players and say, hey, look, we're a few pieces away. We need you on here. You're the, missing piece to the puzzle here. Once we get you, we'll do this, this, and that. But I think right away, adding more teams at the end of the day isn't going to change the outcome of the entire playoff. I mean, we're still going to have, 4 teams, even though we now also have 5 through 12. So the Alabama, the Georgia, Oklahoma, Clemson, Ohio State, whatever it may be, those teams are still going to be there. They just now have to go through a few other steps before they can make it to, the top four or the national championship. But it's very interesting. I've been reading up a lot on it. There's a lot of things that aren't being, covered nationally. For example, I don't think a lot of people know that the current format is actually under contract until 2025, but they would amend the contract to make it 2023 when all this would start. So a lot of people are thinking, this year, maybe, 12-team playoff next year, when in reality it's going to take 3, maybe even 4 years before we could see this thing actually come to fruition.
Yeah, the absolute earliest we can get it is 2023. How do you think this will impact scheduling, though, if at all? Because, we know Alabama's non-conference schedule, for the most part, probably about 90% of it over the next decade and a half. But when you look out to the Pac-12, where they see this opportunity to finally be a real contender in the postseason, or these group of 5 schools that are not going to want to have to schedule Power 5 schools that can beat them and derail a perfect season, that they would need to get into one of those 12 seeds or any of these matchups. I mean, you look at Georgia, and I heard Kirby Smart tell Marty and McGee a few Saturdays ago that he thinks that the Clemson matchup is still good for Georgia. They've got it scheduled this year, 2 years from now, and then for several years in a row in the 2030s, where that matchup can probably still help them and not define their seasons because it'll be early. But when it comes down to it, these teams, are still going to want to be as close to perfect as possible to ensure a spot. How do you think this is going to impact the scheduling of programs across the country to try to claim one of those 12 seeds?
Well, let me put it this way. If scheduling non-conference Power 5 opponents was bad, Alabama might be SOL here for the next decade and a half, like you said, because, how many Power 5 non-conference opponents have they scheduled in the last 2 years up until like 2032?
It's got to be like 20.
Yeah.
It feels like it.
But I know when you look at the Pac-12, the Big 12, the ACC, conferences like that, they need all the help they can get due to just lack of strength within their own conference to boost their own resume. When you look at the Big 10 and the SEC, I don't think there are going to be any problems there with, a 2-loss Alabama team potentially making, the college football playoff. And I've noticed on Twitter a lot of people have been saying, well, extending the playoff this much is going to make the regular season, worthless. There's no point in watching it. To me, the NBA playoff makes it so that, the regular season isn't worth watching. This, however, makes it more exciting because for example, Penn State last season, they dropped 2 very, very early in the season. They did not look good at all for the rest of the season. But when a big team like that loses early, you almost feel as if there's no point in the rest of the season because when you narrow it down to only 4 teams to make the playoff, like you said, Jacob, you have to remain perfect. I think this gives teams, a little bit of leeway to, maybe drop a game. Not that you want to drop a game, but that, if it happens, it's not like your entire season is ruined.
Like the NBA playoffs does make, I fully agree with you. The NBA playoffs does make the regular season pretty meaningless. Having an 82-game schedule makes it pretty meaningless too. But at the end of the day, their playoffs is where the NBA makes their money because it doesn't get much better than that. And it's the same thing with college basketball. The NFL's playoffs work very well. Don't you think on some scale that improving the playoffs in college football and maybe taking that slight bit away from the win it all or whatever situation, the fact that so many people think it's the best the best regular season in sports because of the do or die situations, don't you think giving so much more to the playoffs can help? Which is better, to have that do or die regular season or to have an expanded playoff with more moments of emotion and uncertainty?
I prefer the latter, in all honesty. I use Penn State as an example just because, my college roommate was a Penn State fan, and he lost his mind early in the season last year just because he knew for the rest of Penn State's season, nothing is going to matter. If you drop the first game or the second game, even the third game, really your chances of making it back up into the top 4 are, next to none. All right, Alabama made the college football playoff a few years ago after losing to Auburn, right? But that was very late in the season. There were some other things that had to happen, and Alabama just made it, and even then a lot of people were upset about it. This, to me, is perfect. I can't put it any other way besides saying, you lose a game, so what? Try to pick back up, try to sneak back into the top 12 instead of trying to go from, 15th all the way back down into the top 4, which is nearly impossible.
But on the devil's advocate side of that, because I understand where a lot of people feel this, it's going to be a lot harder to have undefeated champions in this realm with this new playoff scheme. And that is one thing that's unique to college football. And I think that's a place that a lot of people are coming from that are against these changes, is the uniqueness of college football against every other sport, even it's Big Daddy in the NFL, is the uniqueness. Does the playoffs eventually kind of take away some of that uniqueness, or does it bring something new to the table that we don't know how good it can be until we have it?
I think it's going to bring something new to the table, and I'll tell you what I think it is before we even see it happen. You look at March Madness and all these Cinderella stories like UMBC a few years ago. Basketball and football are very different, wherein that football, 9 times out of 10, the better team will win. In basketball, it's kind of iffy sometimes. You can have an off day, things aren't going your way, the other team's hot, you're not. In football, it's not really like that. But I'm looking right here at what the 2020 college football playoff would have been like if they had the 12-team format. Coastal Carolina would have played Notre Dame. All right. Now, Jacob, let me ask you, who do you think is going to win that, Notre Dame or Coastal Carolina?
Oh, Notre Dame.
All right. BYU, Coastal Carolina last year, everyone I knew thought BYU was going to walk away with that. Coastal Carolina presumably the worst team. However, they showed up to play, and they outplayed BYU.
Right.
You never know what's going to happen on these fields just because Coastal Carolina, they know they're the underdog. They show up to play. They're more prepared. I mean, heck, these are trap games in the playoffs. For me, that's about as exciting as it can get. If I can see a Coastal Carolina win over Notre Dame in the playoffs, I might as well just call it quits and never watch college football again because that's my peak.
What's bizarre to me is for a lot of the people that are so heavily against the expansion, they remember so vividly App State beating Michigan. They remember so vividly Troy beating LSU. So many of those upsets, and now they would mean even more in the grander scheme of things. A Cincinnati beating a Georgia would be history. A Coastal Carolina beating a Notre Dame, that would be history. We're talking to AJ Spur of USA Today's Roll Tide Wire. I'm Jacob Harrison filling in for Travis Reier here on Southern Fried Sports. AJ, let's talk about the NIL side of things too. Early this week, the NCAA loses the Alston case, which has a lot to do with the educational benefits that athletes can receive. And while that was a big common sense ruling that took 100 years to get to, we're on the other side. Brett Kavanaugh, eviscerated is a disgusting word, but when it's used in this context, it is such a beautiful word because there's no better word to describe what Kavanaugh did to the NCAA, saying that their business model would be flatly illegal in most cases in America and that the NCAA is not above the law. Of course, all Kavanaugh's words did was just put pressure on the NCAA and draw social media's attention to what the NCAA does, and saying that there are those in the government that not only just question the leadership in the NCAA, but thinks that they're breaking antitrust laws. Now, of course, with the meetings that are going on both yesterday and today, they've got to figure something out. But July 1st is looming. What do you think the NCAA is going to be able to do about this situation that befalls them heading into the fall season?
Well, first of all, I want to say, being a politics guy, I've never seen so much universal support behind Brett Kavanaugh after that statement came out. I thought that was hilarious. As for what the NCAA can do, to be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, we're sitting, about a week out now from July 1st. There's Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, New Mexico, and Texas. All have signed bills set to go into, action in a week. The NCAA just got demolished by a Supreme Court justice that a lot of people are now supporting that a few months ago would have, opted to not have on the Supreme Court. There's so many things right here. The NCAA is trying to do, too much too late, in my opinion. These are things that could have been worked out a long, long time ago. They've stalled. These are things that, it can't be done in this amount of time, especially considering the deadline is, a week away. I've got a tee time for golf planned past then. How is the NCAA going to fix all this by then?
And what's wild is that the NCAA has 6 commissioners, including Greg Sankey, that just in the span of the past few weeks have proposed a different route to handle NIL, and that being basically to just hand it over to the schools and the state legislature and let them handle it and take the NCAA's hands off of it completely. Now, from a certain point of view, that would seem to make sense because the NCAA already struggles to police its schools in recruiting allegations and those sorts of things. They struggle to have consistent punishments across the board. They even struggle to uphold those punishments and let them last as long as they're supposed to. But on the other side of that, you're putting this in the hands of people who can bend the rules a little bit to their advantage or have no idea what they're doing and are actually going to hurt their programs in the long run. I can't contend that Georgia would benefit from what their state has in place as far as spreading the wealth of the top players to the rest of the athletes in the state. So which way do you think, because I'm going to look at it the way I do and have my opinion, so I'm curious about yours. Which way out of those do you think is the best route, and which one do you think is the one we actually end up getting?
Well, to start off, I think that the one we do end up getting is what you said, which is leaving it to the schools and, state legislators. I can't see the NCAA supporting, the, control coming from the top, from the NCAA, from the federal level. That is what I think would be best as long as they're able to do it right. I was talking to, a few agents just the other day about what this means for high school players going into the collegiate level. How does that, affect, because they're allowed to work with agents on signing deals. They're allowed financial advice now if their state has an NIL bill passed. And what they said was, when you look at the MLB, the NBA, and the NFL, it's all centralized. It's all at the top of each respective league. If a player has a contract with Nike or with Adidas, but their league is represented by Nike, there's no gray area. It's a fine line. When they're not on the court, they're allowed to wear Adidas, the brand they're represented by. When they are on the field, they wear Nike. The issue with the NCAA is, every school has a different sponsorship deal. Alabama has Nike. Florida has Jordan brand. So it's so complicated here because if the NCAA wants to take full control over it, they can, but it's going to be a very long and tedious process. If they do it state by state and school by school, I think that would take a lot of pressure off of the NCAA. But like you said, there's a lot of room for, disaster to strike.
That's terrifying. The thought of it being in the hands of 50 states and over 1,100 colleges and universities is downright terrifying. But at the very least, we know that on July 1st, no matter what happens, our alma mater is going to be fine. Alabama will be fine. I've looked through Alabama's NIL law. I'm sure you have too, where it's bare bones. It's the basic necessities. It is the basic rules, the basic ideology of what you think it would take to run this and run it effectively. So at the very least, on that side of things, Alabama is set up for success. And when you consider the prestige of the university already, the advantages that the advantage, pun intended, is going to bring to these student athletes as well, at the very least, Alabama fans can know that this is not going to negatively impact Alabama whatsoever.
No. And another thing, Jacob, I do want to point out, and it's related, but it's not necessarily what we've been saying. There are a lot of people that think NIL, name, image, likeness, they think it just means, paying the players. They're basically on payroll now from the university. I really think it needs to be emphasized these players are not being paid by the school. That has been proposed and thought of beforehand. The issue is if they were to split the profits among the entire athletic department, every player would be getting about $9, per semester. These are people that are going to be going out getting their own brand deal, getting their own endorsements, sponsorships outside of the university. They're not allowed to be using, the script A in their imagery, or, they can't say Alabama Star, whatever. They are individuals, just like how you and I, when we were in college, could have gone out and had, sponsorships from mom and pop stores or wherever. But I don't think that's talked about enough.
Yeah, it has to be stressed on and at the very least, from a common sense standpoint, and, Kavanaugh kind of touched on it in his dissertation and in his opinion, how if this is under the NCAA's umbrella, then it kind of creates a windstorm of questions on Title IX. How do you do this fairly? How do you police it? How do you put a cap on it or don't you? Do schools provide the payment or do they get it from third party? I've stood for a long time on the ideal that if you make it about the schools paying the players, then that is one of those things that could break what little structure the college sports has against the idea of allow it to be a capitalistic structure where players are out for themselves. They're able to handle their endorsements however they so choose or are capable of doing based off of not only their skill, but their ability to put themselves out there. One thing that was brought to my attention yesterday, AJ, was, and you mentioned agents earlier, is about the idea that agents can go ahead or are formulating plans, basically, once July starts to kind of get into some of these players' ears and begin to offer them services down the line by giving them a prepaid endorsement, basically. So Agent X walks up to Will Anderson and says, "Here's $500,000 right now. You pay it back to me when you're or after you declare for the NFL draft and you get drafted, and I'm your agent." That worries me a lot, and I think that under any of these rules, no matter which direction the NCAA is able to go to, or even if they kick the can to the states and to the schools, that seems like a huge problem in a lot of ways because, Lord forbid, Will Anderson gets hurt. He's not a first-round pick, and he's got to handle, $500,000 debt to an agent who may not even sign him now. So touch on that situation and how maybe you would try to combat that a little bit in the NCAA shoes.
It's complicated, and like I said earlier, July 1st is a week away, and there are too many things to handle, and I don't even think enough thought has been put into, how do you handle these 18, 19-year-old kids, freshmen in college, even seniors in high school, dealing with agents, that are trying to give them, like you said, $500,000 and, just pay me back later. As far as what the NCAA or the states or the schools, what they can do about it, I don't even know. Do you say, okay, you can't deal with an agent, but we'll give you financial advisors? So does the school offer, financial help and assistance? And that way they kind of steer clear of any wrongdoing from an independent party from the university? Does the state have a committee or a group that will help these players? I think that the only way to do it is from the inside. I cannot see a scenario in which they let, high schoolers basically have free range with the Drew Rosenhauses, the Lee Steinbergs, and all that kind of stuff. Because like you said, Jacob, offer Will Anderson $500,000. He gets injured, no more money to him. That's a dangerous situation. Very, very dangerous situation.
I want to kind of switch gears a little bit to the NFL. Both of us kind of keep close eyes on the Crimson Tide players in the NFL, and you kind of wrote something up from Cynthia Freeland of NFL Network on how the analytics kind of play out for Devontae Smith and for Jalen Waddle, and how they stack up with their rookie class. I got to say, with in mind with what Cynthia Freeland brings to the table, because she's a wildly intelligent lady. How do you see kind of Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith stacking up against each other in relation to who their quarterbacks are? Both of them have former Alabama quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts probably the more inaccurate of the two, and Tua Tagovailoa under probably the more pressure of the two. But both these wide receivers bring a lot of playmaking ability to catch passes from them.
It's interesting because if I'm going to sit here and say, who do I think is going to be the most productive, it's not going to come down to, who the wide receiver is. It's not Jalen Waddle versus Devontae Smith. It's like you said, Jacob, it's basically Tua versus Jalen Hurts, and then also the supporting cast around them. So if we're going quarterback versus quarterback here, I'd prefer Tua. I think that's a fair statement. I don't think Jalen Hurts is as developed as Tua is as far as being a quarterback. I'm excited to see what Jalen Hurts does, though, this season. And then you got to look at the supporting cast. Who's around Devontae Smith? Who's around Jalen Waddle? In this case, I'm going to give it to Devontae Smith. I think Jalen Waddle is surrounded here by Will Fuller, Devontae Parker, Jakeem Grant, Albert Wilson. I mean, the names go on and on with the Miami wide receiving core. So the ball is going to be spread around more there. Devontae Smith has the edge of being wide receiver one in Philadelphia. In my opinion, though, I do think just due to versatility, Jalen Waddle's going to have the edge in being the most productive of the two.
Talking to AJ Spur, writer for USA Today Sports, Roll Tide Wire, covering Alabama football, director of football operations for Tribe Sports Agencies. I'm Jacob Harrison, filling in for Travis Reier on Southern Fried Sports. AJ, your Miami Dolphins, most Alabama players in the NFL on one roster. I was talking to Cameron Wolfe of ESPN a few weeks ago on my show, and he said, and I quote, Raekwon Davis could be the best defensive player on the Miami Dolphins roster very soon. What do you make of that statement?
It doesn't shock me. Did he say best defensive player overall?
On that defense, on the Miami Dolphins defense.
That's a big endorsement from Cameron Wolfe because we're looking at a defense that has one of the strongest secondaries in the league. And, he, in my opinion, isn't even the best defensive lineman on the team. I think he has the potential to become the best defensive lineman. But when you're looking at Emmanuel Ogbah and Christian Wilkins, it's hard for Raekwon Davis to, stand out above the rest. Plus, you have interception leader from last year, Xavier Howard. You have Byron Jones. You have a whole slew of players on this team that are already stars and continue to, impress everyone with their stats. Raekwon just needs to step it up a little bit. I think if he can be the same Raekwon Davis we saw at Alabama next year for the Dolphins, he'll have his he'll have his name in headlines all across the country. I think Dolphins fans are excited to see what he can do. I think they know what he has to offer. And I think they just want to see Crimson Tide Raekwon Davis in a Dolphins uniform.
To me, I was very disappointed with Raekwon. I was very impressed with the first season, but and even with him going as early as he did in the second round to the Dolphins, I initially was like, what are you doing? Like, he's had a couple of down years, but he right really turned around and had an impeccable rookie season. But you named off a lot of superstars for that Dolphins defense, so I was just as surprised when Cameron Wolfe says, he could very well soon be the best player on that defense. Very shocking. One more before we let you go, and of course it's Tua Tagovailoa. He has got a ridiculous amount of pressure on him, and it kind of stems from the line of thinking that the excuses are out the window. You've said it countless times, and this time last year, it would have been filled with laughter. There were no weapons for the Miami Dolphins offense. The offensive line was an even bigger question mark than it is now, and the running back room is it's touchy. Like, maybe somebody can bounce out of that. But nonetheless, Tua has more pressure on him, I think, than any quarterback in the league to get it done right now. And I told Gary the other day, like, the NFL has evolved in the way it looks at these quarterbacks. Just look at Josh Rosen. Absolutely nobody cares that he got dealt a foul hand. And it looks like Tua is being given that if he can't overcome some of the question marks in his game.
100%, and I find it funny that you have the Josh Rosen, comparison in there just because he was on the Dolphins for that 1 year. But you also got to take into account Josh Rosen led the Cardinals to a season where they ended up with the first over.
Oh, well, that is unfortunate. What impeccable timing. We lost A.J. Spur right there at the end. We're running low on time, but I'll see if we can get him back for that final question, since he didn't really get into it at all, and so he can plug some of his stuff. But that's A.J. Spur, writer for USA Today Sports, Roll Tide Wire, covering Alabama football, the director of football operations for Tribe Sports agency. We'll be back right after this for more on Southern Fried Sports. I'm Jacob Harrison, filling in for Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports, Tide 100.9.
You're listening to Southern Fried Sports with BamaOnline.com senior analyst Travis Reier on your home for Alabama sports, Tide 100.9, and streaming on the Tide 100.9 app.
We're back for more Southern Fried Sports here on Tide 100.9, your home for Alabama sports. I am Jacob Harrison, filling in for Travis Reier. We got cut off. What are you going to do about technology? It's fickle. It is what it is. We're talking to A.J. Spur, writer for USA Today Sports, Roll Tide Wire, covering Alabama football, and the director of football operations for Tribe Sports Agency. And we are talking about the pressure that Tua Tagovailoa is under with the Miami Dolphins in a do-it-or-die year, it seems. AJ, finish your thought, man.
I'll make it quick because I know you're pressed up against the clock. But about that comparison with Josh Rosen and Tua Tagovailoa, Josh Rosen was given a bad hand, much like Tua was last season. But Josh Rosen led the Cardinals back to a first overall pick where they got Kyler Murray. Tua nearly missed the playoffs, got him to a 10-6 record. Do I think the pressure's on? 100%, because there's no excuses. However, I don't think it's as bad as everyone's making it seem.
Yeah, certainly. And even though all the excuses are out the door, he's got the weapons, he's got the coaching, he's got the tools to get it done and to prove everyone wrong. I think that with everything the Dolphins have and the talent that he has and the approach that the Dolphins are taking under head coach Brian Flores, they should have a strong chance of finding their way into the playoffs this year. I mean, hell, there's 7 teams. You got to do it, right? AJ, go ahead and tell us what you got going on at Roll Tide Wire and what's going on at Tribe Sports Agency.
Well, for Roll Tide Wire, there's a whole lot of off-season content coming up. A lot of things about who Alabama is going to be facing in the 2021 season, what they might do for the college football playoffs, and highlighting specific players along the way that fans need to look out for that might break out in 2021. With Tribe, a whole lot of recruiting going on, marketing, getting ready for the 2022 NFL draft. So, just coming off the 2021 draft, my brain's fried, already getting geared up for 2022.
Absolutely. At Spur FM on the Twitter account. Make sure to go give him a follow and stay up to date on all things Alabama Crimson Tide, as well as those Miami Dolphins, who have the most Crimson Tide alumni on an NFL roster. Man, we always appreciate your time, AJ. It's always good stuff. We'll catch up with you next time.
Sounds good, Jacob. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We got to get out of here. We're out of time. We're managing the clock just as good as Travis Reier does. I promise. We're doing a good job. I'm Jacob Harrison. I'm going to be continuing to fill in for Travis Reier the next 2 days. He'll be back next week, so no worries there. Tomorrow we'll have Tyler Martin on to break down some of the recruiting action that's going on for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Until then, have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Tide 100.9 Tuscaloosa weather.
A nice early summer day is in progress across the area. Lots of sunshine, just some fair weather cumulus clouds. It'll be that way again tomorrow. 85 the daytime high today. Will drop to around 66 overnight tonight and back up to 86 degrees tomorrow. I'm meteorologist Bill Murray on Tide 100.9.
It's 82 degrees in Tuscaloosa.
Thank you for listening.